So look, welcome. This is the Royal Berkshire Annual General Meeting. My name's Graham Sims. I'm the Chair of the Trust and very proud to be so. This evening we have a few presenters and I'll introduce them in a moment, and we'll go through some of the things we're proud of, some of the challenges and what sort of a year we've had, plus we'll talk about the year to come. So it will be filmed, and as I said, it'll be posted on our website in the not too distant future, and that'll be a regular thing going forward so that all of our members and the public, our community at large, can see what we discuss and our presentation. So we're going to spend about an hour going through some presentations. What I would ask of you, if I may, is let the presenters go through their presentations to tell the full story, a story we're very proud of in this our 180th year. Well, it's actually our 181st year, but you know what I mean. So let us tell the story. I will make sure there is sufficient time, at least half an hour at the end, for questions and answers, which I will chair, and we already have some written questions from members who can't be here tonight, and I will open it up to the audience here. So what we'll do, the presentations first, and then we'll come back to the Q&A. I'm going to be introducing Steve McManus in a minute, who's our Chief Executive. He's in his third year and doing a wonderful job for us. We have a brand new Chief Financial Officer in Nikki Lloyd, who will follow Steve, and she has brought a whole new perspective on our finance and the way we manage our finances here in the Trust. And last but not least, our wonderful lead governor, Tony Lloyd. I actually hadn't thought of that, two Lloyds. Who will give a governor perspective, and I think we've made some enormous strides over the last few years, and we're a very strong trust from a governance point of view, and I think Tony should take some credit for helping us get there. So those three, you'll see them all jumping up and down and doing their presentations, and then the whole board is in the room, and any questions that you ask at the end, I'll direct it to the right person who can probably answer much better than I can most questions. So we'll get to the crux of the matter then. Before I pass to Steve, I think I'd just focus on three things. First of all, this is my fourth year as chair of this trust, and I can't tell you how proud I am when I look at the progress we've made over the last 3 or 4 years, particularly in the last couple of years as we put in place a very strong strategy. We've really started to understand what the community needs of us, what our regulators need, and all of the changes that we've been putting in place are to drive a sustainable future. And so I can't tell you how proud it is to see that transformation over the last few years. And it sort of came to a head this year, just a couple of months ago, when we did celebrate our 180th anniversary as a trust, as a hospital. I'm not sure I'll be here in 180 years, but certainly what I see happening now is going to certainly give assurance that this trust and this hospital is here in 180 years. So I'm very proud of all that. Secondly, in terms of performance, to give you some assurance, and Steve and Nikki will go into further detail. Sure, it's been challenging, and I'm sure you're very well aware of that if you watch the media or if you experience services in the NHS. It's been challenging. Demand has been rising exponentially in some areas, but we as a trust have had an extremely satisfying year. We've outperformed most of our peers in most of the things we're measured on, whether they be financial or clinical. Not all, but most of them. And I think it's a testament to the wonderful work that's done, not just by the 6,000 people that work permanently or temporarily or as volunteers in the trust, but also the executive who lead them, who have done a tremendous job at really directing this trust into the right direction. This is your trust, and you should feel confident that that leadership is bearing fruit already. The other thing I would say is, more widely, we are being recognised as part of a collegiate group of people, of organisations in West Berkshire, at creating a more joined up service to the community. And again, whilst there are challenges and we're in a process of evolution, there are enormous improvements coming through because of that closer working relationship with GPs, with the community care providers, with the mental health providers, with the CCGs, with the other acute providers in and around particularly Berkshire, Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. So enormous change, tremendous change, and I think that's really a fundamental part of how we're moving forward. So I hope in what you'll see today is some of that pride and some of that story coming through. I hope you'll feel as proud as members as we are. As I say, there are challenges. We're up for meeting those challenges, and the person, of course, that's leading us through that is Steve. So why don't I pass to Steve, and he can take us through his part of the story.
Thanks, Graham. Good evening, everybody. My name's Steve McManus. I'm the Chief Exec of the Royal Berkshire Foundation Trust. an absolute kind of privilege to be in my third year, and a real privilege to be in this kind of position. As kind of Graham says, I probably want to start by paying a tribute and a thanks to the 5,500 staff and the 400 kind of volunteers that work within the organisation that make what we do every day possible. But actually equally through to our kind of governors, the members that are here today, and the kind of wider community, because as you'll hopefully get a sense from the presentations this evening and discussion, actually that focus that we've had around our place within the community and the community we serve is really, really strong. We're looking back to look forward is the kind of theme this evening, and that kind of looking back really is recognising an element of where we've come from and where that positions us now within our kind of community in Reading and kind of Berkshire and beyond, and a little bit about some of our aspirations kind of going forward, recognising some of the challenges we face, but actually the real kind of strong sense of ambition that we have for what we can provide to the community. So as part of looking back, and as part of our fantastic 180th year anniversary celebrations that we've kind of had recently, we've got a fantastic video which just gives you an 8-minute window into that history, where we've come from. And then I'll pick up the thread after that about where we are now and that kind of position looking forward.
Welcome to the story of the Royal Berkshire Hospital. Together with some of my colleagues and now fellow volunteers at our medical museum here, we're going to take you on a short journey through the history of the Royal Berkshire Hospital. And now I'd like to introduce you to two of my wonderful colleagues who are going to be helping me find out more about the history of this hospital.
I'm Betty Messer, and I was here for 42 years. I trained at this hospital and I worked here in several guises, lots of paediatrics, and I was also a qualified teacher of nurses.
My name is Tim Smith. I was consultant anaesthetist here for 25 years.
On May the 27th, 1839, the hospital opened its doors. The first patient that was admitted was a young man called George Early. He was 15 years old and had a badly injured arm in a railway accident. He had an operation where he had his arm amputated at the shoulder. It was a miracle, but he survived and he left the hospital in July.
The first 7 or 8 years of the hospital's existence was in the pre-anaesthetic era. Not many operations were performed. The major ones were amputation and cutting for the bladder stone. And then in 1847, anaesthesia was used for the first time, which was a momentous occasion. The next significant advance was in 1867 with the Lister's antiseptic spray. And those two things, anaesthesia and antisepsis, made the whole future development of surgery possible.
In May 1862, both the east and the west wings were added. By 1874, a separate ward for children was established in the west wing. Charitable giving goes back here to the 16th of July 1887, when the very first Hospital Sunday took place. And these continued until 1899, when the Hospital Appeal was formed. And this wonderful tradition continues to the present day, when the League of Friends and the Royal Berks Charity raise huge amounts of money, which plays the most crucial part in the running of the Trust today.
In the early 1900s, we start to see the beginnings of specialisation, something we now take for granted. In 1904, surgeons were appointed to ENT and to ophthalmology. And in 1913, the first pathology laboratory was opened.
At the same time as all these surgical advances, children were given a new home here on King Edward VII ward. And these wonderful tiles were specially commissioned to brighten the walls.
When World War I broke out, The Royal Berkshire Hospital was one of 6 war hospitals that were allocated military beds. They were allocated 50 beds, which was 25%. In addition to this, there was a huge meningitis outbreak, which meant that they needed many more beds for the patients to be nursed in. And they opened up a tented village in the garden. It wasn't only the doctors that specialised, it was the nurses, and they also increased in number, and it was felt that it was needed somewhere for them to stay. So the nurses' home was built on this site, which is now the multi-storey car park.
In 1931, one of our most famous patients, Douglas Bader, benefited from the operating theatres that had been recently opened, only 3 years earlier. His life is depicted in the film Reach for the Sky. Bader crashed at Woodley Aerodrome and was brought to the hospital in a pretty dreadful state and was taken straight to theatre. His life was saved by Leonard Joyce, who unfortunately had to amputate both legs. Bader went on to become a famous fighter ace and squadron leader in the Second World War.
One of the most generous donations the hospital has received was from Lord Nuffield, who founded the Morris Car Company. In 1937, he gave this hospital £30,000, which was the cost of building the new Nuffield block, which had in it new gynecology wards and also wards for children. And I'm speaking to you now from an iron lung, one of many produced to assist patients with polio. This one was made in the Morris Car factory in Oxford and was given to the hospital by Lord Nuffield in 1939. The hospital celebrated its first 100 years in 1939. To mark the centenary, the hospital was also awarded its coat of arms. We're now going to take a giant leap to the 1960s. It was the decade which saw the eye and maternity blocks built and the opening of the Nurse Education Centre.
But the 1970s were also a time of enormous social change. Medical advances also continued apace. At the RBH, these included the opening of the first intensive care unit in 1971. One of our first patients was Detective Constable Ian Coward, who'd been shot while trying to arrest a criminal. He was treated for several weeks in the intensive care unit, but sadly died of his injuries. He was awarded the Queen's Medal for Gallantry posthumously.
One of the values of the Royal Berkshire Hospital is to be aspirational. And this is as true today as in the past. The 1970s saw the opening of the new postgraduate medical education centre, now familiarly known as TEC, where a vast amount of teaching has been delivered in order to continue to provide outstanding care for our patients. Another area where aspiration was really brought to life was by consultant anaesthetist Marshall Barr.
Well, I was a trainee anaesthetist at the Royal Berkshire Hospital in the early 1980s. And at that time, the hours that you worked a week were between about 80 and 100, and that involved a 1 in 4 weekend on call. And it was extremely difficult to try and combine that with having children. Fortunately for me, I was in the right place at the right time, being at the Royal Berkshire Hospital, because Marshall Barr, who was the educational supervisor at that point, was an avid proponent of the part-time married women's doctor scheme, and he persuaded me to apply for that. And that allowed you to work half the number of hours a week for twice as many years. But that meant I could actually finish my training and combine that with having a family. And if I hadn't done that, I would never have been a consultant.
So we leave the 1970s and enter the 1980s, a decade which showed enormous changes in national healthcare policy. Here at the RBH, the modern-day Path Lab was opened. In 1980, the Ken Thomas appeal raised £1.25 million. The A&E unit moved from Battle Hospital to the RBH. And in 1989, we celebrated our 150th anniversary, which was marked by a visit from Her Majesty the Queen.
With the Copeland shoulder and laryngeal mask for anaesthetics, to name just two of the many major developments by teams here at the Royal Berkshire Hospital, our legacy is always one of innovation and change. We will always look ahead to the challenges of the future and the health and well-being of the people we serve, while embracing our role as an iconic part of the local community since 1839. So here we are today, and our story will continue. Perhaps some of you would like to join us in the Medical Museum to help pass on the legacy of the Royal Berkshire Hospital into the future.
Hopefully you enjoyed that. This was produced by our kind of volunteers from the Medical Museum, and it's a huge gratitude for them for all the work that they put into that. I think it's really important for us to actually kind of recognise that history. So 180 years now providing continuous healthcare services to the community of Reading and Berkshire, and it's a really important part of how we look at our place now and also kind of our aspirations in terms of the future as well. It's been a real privilege to be able to celebrate the 180th years. We've done that through a number of ways. We've had the coat of arms that was talked about there, now kind of reprinted on our flag, which is on the main flagpole in Craven Road. We were able to also produce our kind of history wall, which on level 2, where the volunteers desk is here, you will see if you have the opportunity to do that. We've also had the opportunity over that 180-year period and more kind of recently to celebrate our place in the community is extended beyond where we are here on the Royal Berkshire Hospital, but to our locations that we're providing health services and care from now across the county of Berkshire through our 5 other locations. And it's really important to recognise those 5 other locations and the dedicated staff that work out of those areas as well. So it's a really proud kind of moment to be able to celebrate our 180th year and going into this next year as well. Something just about our community. Really important about how we're working with our communities. So we provide significant opportunities in terms of education and training here, really looking at the health and care workers in terms of the next kind of generation, but also kind of the support that we provide into the community about wider kind of training opportunities. Our research and development opportunities in terms of partnership with University of Reading, again giving opportunities for our community to be involved in advanced treatments and research opportunities of the future. An economic impact of what we bring in terms of our 5,500 staff that work in this kind of organisation, but that kind of extended logistics around us in terms of the health economy that we support. We use our facilities directly in terms of community kind of in-reach, as well as actually using our facilities in terms of our people working out with local communities. And our location is really important. I've talked about kind of Reading, but our location across West Berkshire, out in Newbury, up in Henley, over in Bracknell, and also in Windsor as well. So we're really important locations in our community outside of Reading as well. I just want to talk through reasonably quickly about our strategic objectives. So the 5 things that we've been really focusing on over this past year and will continue to be our focus over this kind of next period. For colleagues who were here last year, we talked about how we recast our vision for the organisation and these 5 long-term objectives that very much came out of listening to our staff, our volunteers, our members, our governors, and our broader kind of public. So our vision of working together to provide outstanding care for our community is actually a really purposeful vision. Those 3 components really mean stuff to our community and to our staff. So working together is really important for us, and that's come through really strongly through our community and our staff engagement. Our aspiration about providing outstanding care is something that very much drives us. And you notice we don't have the word patient in there, we have the word community, which just really underlines that focus we have around serving our community. But the fact that the majority of our staff this is also their hospital as well. So our staff community see a high level of value in terms of the role that they play here. So we have 5 long-term objectives about highest quality of care, really investing in our staff and living out our values, around how we integrate our services in that wider community, how we be innovative and how we transform what we do. Again, that history over the last 180 years, constantly looking for what's next, and actually doing that in a financially sustainable way. So I'm just going to quickly run through kind of each of those in terms of a bit of a look back and a bit of a view to the future as well. So around providing the highest quality care, one of that aspects is really how we're performing, as the chairman talked around access to services. And I know that the teams under Mary Sherry, our Deputy Chief Exec and Chief Operating Officer's leadership, have worked really hard over this year in terms of the demands that we're seeing coming through our emergency department and our kind of urgent care services. And whilst that demand has been significant, we've seen a real kind of step change in terms of the experience that we've been able to provide, particularly over this winter period, for patients, for their carers, but also for our staff as well. We're still really strong in terms of our performance around access to cancer care, and also in some of our planned care access around planned operations and outpatients. But we know that that's areas that we can still improve and do better on. We also have been really innovative in terms of some of the treatments that we're providing, and we've got real opportunities in terms of expanding some of those treatments through our research programme and through the clinicians that we're bringing into the organisation. And as we look ahead in terms of our place in the community, we're really pleased and proud of opening new facilities at West Berkshire Community Hospital in terms of our renal dialysis facilities there and our IV chemotherapy facilities. And looking over this next year, again, expanding our services at Bracknell in terms of our radiotherapy services out there, again, so as we're bringing those services into the community. An area that we know that over this year that we do need to look forward to in terms of improvements is the experience of people travelling onto this site in terms of car parking and transport. And we're absolutely committed over this kind of next period to actually see improvements around that, despite how challenging that may be in terms of the site that we're working with here. But that's an area in our quality priorities that we've identified for this next period, because we know of the impact that that has on our patients, on visitors, and also on our staff. So investing in our staff, again, really important. Our people are our most important asset within the organisation. Our staff and our volunteers that give their time so generously to the organisation. So over this last 12 months, we've really built on our programme of engagement with our staff. We've seen a second year of improvement in terms of our staff survey, one of the highest performing organisations in the country around our staff survey in terms of engagement with our staff, and that's really kind of positive. We've also seen an expansion of our leadership programmes and our partnership with Henley Business School in providing those opportunities to our people. Over this next period, we know that the pressures on our people, on our workforce, and our gaps that we have in some of our workforce numbers requires us to really think differently about the roles that we have within the organisation, and to really kind of commit to working in partnership with other organisations around us about how we can attract and retain the best staff into Berkshire in this organisation and the other organisations that we work with, and continuing to focus on those aspects of the staff survey that are raised by our staff about where we know we need to make improvements, so we can really make the Royal Berkshire Foundation Trust the best place to work. So we've talked a lot about our kind of integration within the community, and this again a really important part of being part of the Berkshire West kind of system with our partners within our community mental health organisations, our commissioners, also with our primary care and local authority kind of partners. But actually that's much more extensive than that. So how we work with the police, with third sector organisations, and with our community kind of leaders and our community groups. So as we're really looking at making the most of that partnership that we have within Berkshire West. But also looking further afield, so across a wider geography, working with those other organisations around us in Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire, so again we can make the most of scale that we have through working across that geography. And one area, particularly locally, that we're looking to work in partnership with other local organisations, is really how we start to transform the offer that we're providing to the community around our outpatient services, how we're providing outpatients, where we're providing outpatient services, and really looking to transform that as a kind of major piece of work for the local community. Innovation and transformation absolutely at the heart of what we're looking to aspire to again over this next kind of period. We've got a major programme over the last 12 months in terms of bringing the organisation into a kind of digital environment. So really getting our clinical records and how we look at prescribing medicines and how we work within outpatients into a digital space. And over the next kind of 12 months, again, we'll be extending that further into kind of other aspects of where we've still got paper records and bringing that into the kind of digital era. That starts to unlock real opportunities for us in terms of how we transform services, how we can actually engage with the public and with our patients in terms of their clinical records, but also how we can connect the care that's being delivered in different parts of the local system, so as actually the single clinical record can be viewed by those clinicians giving care continuously to patients within our community. And finally, really looking at achieving long-term financial sustainability. Nikki, who I'll introduce in a second, will talk in more detail about our financial kind of position over this last 12 months and looking ahead a little bit. Really pleased that we delivered a end-of-year surplus that Nikki will talk further about. And that surplus is really important for us because actually being financially viable is about how we can invest back into this organisation, back into our community, into our people and into our facilities. And particularly looking ahead over this next 12 months, being able to invest into the physical facilities of our estate. I touched on aspects of car parking, but actually on the wider estate. So the experience that patients and our staff have of the environment that we're operating on this site and in our other locations, and how we invest in the technology that enables us to deliver care in a different way, not just kind of physically, is going to be really important. So that financial sustainability is really important to allow us to invest over this next 12 months, but importantly over the next 5 years in the facilities that we're able to offer the community and for our staff in terms of what they work within. So for me, it's been a really pleasing year in terms of what we've kind of delivered around the quality of our care, our kind of access performance in terms of access to care, and also how we've delivered that in a financially sustainable way. But a lot more to do over this kind of next period in terms of continuing with that kind of innovation and that development for the next period. It's a great delight that I can introduce Nikki Lloyd. So Nikki joined us at the beginning of the year as our new Chief Financial Officer. And Nikki will just kind of take us through now the financial position and a bit of a look forward in terms of the next 12 months as well. Thank you.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. My name's Nikki Lloyd. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today, and thank you for braving the pre-air conditioned environment before you came in here. I'd like to take you through our financial results for last year and also look forward to the coming year. I did bring the whole of them with me, but the chairman's limited me on time, so I won't be reading through the whole annual report, but I have that here because I like to carry that around. So the group accounts, colleagues will be aware we are effectively a group of organisations. We have our main trust, the Royal Berkshire Foundation Trust, but we also have a subsidiary company which runs 2 of our buildings and facilities, and we also have our charity. So we produce consolidated group accounts for our auditors, and these follow international reporting standards as you'd expect. Our auditors are Deloitte. They gave their opinion on the year-end position, and we submitted those to our NHS Improvement in May, and they were laid before Parliament in June in line with all the deadlines. And Deloitte and PwC, our internal auditors, reported at our audit committee and they were happy that all of their testing provided assurance that our accounts were not materially misstated. So in terms of what the numbers are telling us, as Steve mentioned, it's really important for us as an organisation to generate surpluses that's the resources we can use to invest in capital improvements in future years. So on an income last year of 435 million, we generated an operating surplus of just under 24 million and a retained surplus of 16 million. So the operating costs, as you'd expect, that includes our staff costs, our running the buildings and the assets we've just talked about, but the majority of our spend is on pay costs. And in terms of operating costs excluding gains, the cost went up by 4.7% last year. Cash flows are really important within the NHS, as it is within any business. If you can't pay your suppliers on time, if you can't pay your people, you can't continue. And I'm really pleased to report we continue to have a positive cash flow as an organisation. You can see from the cash flow statement that's up on the screen at the moment where that cash has gone. So we spent just short of £27 million on fixed assets, so that's equipment and building improvements and digital spend last year, much increased on the year before, and we're looking to spend even more than that this year, which I'll come to in a moment. We've also received additional cash in the form of public dividend from the NHS to help us fund some of our schemes. So in terms of the income statement itself, our surplus was higher than the previous year, which is good news, but you'll see our cost base in terms of pay also increased over the same period. We're a sizable business by any measure, 435 million of sales or income, and so we have continued to receive deliver our services. Capital spend. So I thought I'd put some pictures on here because I think when everyone thinks of capital spend, we think about new machinery. You'll be aware if you've walked around our site and you've just seen the film, some of the buildings have been up for 180 years. We also need to spend money on our infrastructure, so the steam plant, the roofs, the drains, and in the modern age as well, making sure our Wi-Fi works everywhere as we move to an increasingly digital hospital. So it's important that we are generating surpluses to be able to continue to invest in that regard. So those are the pounds numbers, those are the numbers that get audited. I also thought it'd be helpful to share some of the scale of what we do in terms of the other numbers. So over 7,000 sales invoices were generated to tie up that income. We processed 84,000 odd purchase invoices to cover what we've bought in from suppliers. And our payroll team, we offer payroll services to other NHS organisations locally, processed 124,000 payslips over the period. We also received nearly 70,000 parcels. That's excluding the big cages that we received from NHS supply chain. And just the quantum, so the number of boxes of white paper, although we know that's going to go down as we move more digital, but the number of pairs of gloves and the boxes of gloves and the pallets we're receiving, just the logistics operation we run here at the Trust is bigger than most local companies. In terms of the facilities management numbers, again, 3 million items of linen. So if you think your laundry is bad at the end of the week, this is the scale of what we do here. And also in terms of the estates, so our facilities teams receive calls, reactive maintenance, as well as our planned maintenance. And they make sure that all of the clinical frontline staff can do what they do right first time with kit that's working in a clean environment. And thinking of cleaning, just to get a scale of how much we clean each day, I don't know how many of you are football fans and have visited the Majeski Stadium, so imagine 16.5 of those pitches, that's how much floor we clean every day here at the Trust. In terms of our income statement for this year, I thought it'd be helpful to have a look forward. So we're expecting to deliver a 12.7 million surplus for the coming year, and our incomes, we're planning that will grow by 2%. The other thing we've got to bear in mind is our costs, so inflation. We have been funded for inflation, but we're also expecting to see pressures on our position from supplier inflation through pay costs also. So we have to continue to find efficiencies and make sure we make savings in the way we run our services. And in terms of how we've moved from what our position was last year to this year, and again the writing on this is really tiny, but the elements we've got in here, we've got funding for income increases, we've got inflation funding, but we've also got service development funding. So the 5.5 million red box just near the end, that's us deciding where we're going to put our investments to grow services or to move extra resource into particular services where we've identified a need for that. I'd like to hand over now to Tony, who's our lead governor, and as our chair said at the beginning, I'm happy to take any questions on the financials at the end. So Tony, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Tony Lloyd. I'm an elected public governor for Wokingham Borough. I'm here to talk to you this evening because my governor colleagues elected me as lead governor. May I remind you that this is the annual members' meeting of the Trust. A major part of my role here is to report back to members of the Trust on the activities of governors over the past year and our plans for the future. Governors are not executive. I'm not here to talk about Trust performance, but perhaps I can say how proud I, and I believe most of my governor colleagues are, to be associated with such a successful and well-led Trust. That's also what we said to the CQC governors a month ago. Now, at most concerts that I attend, they put the star attraction on last, after the warm-up acts. Not here. You've just heard 3 excellent and stimulating presentations by Graham, Steve and Nicky. Much of my presentation is prescribed by either the Trust's constitution or by legislation, and is rather less likely to be stimulating. One of the questions that I'm asked most often by members of the public is, what do governors do actually? And much the same is true for members of the Trust staff here. A consultant at the Trust, after asking for my support a couple of weeks ago, added, "Oh, I thought you governors were all powerful." Unfortunately not. The reality is that our day-to-day activity boils down to 2 main duties: holding the non-executive directors, or NEDs as we tend to refer to them, to account for the performance of the board, and representing the interests of members and the public. These duties were enshrined in the 2012 Act, unaccompanied by any detail as to how this was to be done. Frankly, we could probably be better at it, but we're not complacent, and with the help and guidance of our excellent Trust Secretary and Chairman, we are pressing for and trying out new ways of working. With regard to holding the NEDs to account, we have over the past 2 years bent over backwards to take into account the pressure that they are under and to reduce our demands on their time. We have, however, asked for, and will continue to ask for, more opportunities to observe them in action other than at public board meetings. We all participate in their annual appraisals, and the more we can observe them in action, the more informed those appraisals will be. We also need to make better use of the time that we do spend with NEDs by improving the ways in which we seek assurance from them. With regard to representing the interests of members and the public, this is a huge ask. There are just 15 public governors representing over 500,000 people, with little or no regular means of accessing their views. An outsider might think, for example, that members and the public would communicate with their elected governors via the Trust website. However, other than the issues relating to the proposed closure of the hydrotherapy pool back in 2016, I've only had 1 incoming message from a member or from the public during my entire 5 years as a governor at this Trust. Similarly, at Council of Governors meetings, I can only recall 1 question being asked by a member of the public. On the other hand, because I'm involved in a number of community organisations in the area, I get a huge amount of feedback from those sources, though it is not always obvious how to effectively channel that feedback back to the Trust. Clearly, members in the public have views about the quality of the healthcare that the Trust provides, but quite rightly, we as governors are advised to redirect individual complaints and other patient comments to the PALS service. A disadvantage of that is that we're not currently as aware as we would like to be of the general nature and trend of issues being referred to the Trust by patients, which in turn limits our ability to hold the NEDs to account for the quality of service provision. Next slide, please. This slide shows the structure within which governors have to work. As required under statute, a foundation trust must have a council of governors, whose membership is also largely prescribed by either statute or the trust constitution. Statute also prescribes the requirements for a governor's nominations and remuneration committee in order to recruit, reward, and, if appropriate, dismiss non-executive directors, including the chairman. Our membership committee is responsible for developing our membership strategy. It reviews how representative our membership is of our community and tries to establish priorities for recruitment. It also reviews the programme of membership events and the arrangements for the Trust Open Day. During the year, the Governor's Strategy Committee was disbanded and incorporated as a standing item within the proceedings of an expanded Council of Governors. Apart from Council and Board and public board meetings, this leaves the Governor's Assurance Committee as the main opportunity for governors to interact with non-executive directors and to hold them to account. This committee meets 4 times a year for 2 hours. Next slide. When we ask ourselves, as we often do, what we're trying to achieve as governors, we need to reflect on the objectives of the Foundation Trust model. Ultimately, a Foundation Trust should be accountable to the community that it serves, subject to complying with the various regulations and guidelines handed down by NHS England regulators and politicians. Our role, therefore, is to do what we can to realise that accountability in a responsible manner. As lay people, we select the non-executive directors to act on our behalf and to hold the Trust executives to account. Governors, as a group, have a heavy responsibility for selecting the right non-executive directors and for making sure that they're doing their job effectively. To do this, motivated governors can and do get more closely involved in the work of the Trust. We do need to understand the constraints under which the Trust works, the challenges it faces, and the considerable achievements that it has made. We have no executive responsibility and have few opportunities to interact with Trust staff, but where those opportunities do exist, such as the monthly patient safety executive walkarounds, we take full advantage of them. Members' and patients' views and experiences can be fed back during the Governor's Assurance Committee meetings, or, if a response is provided, via the Governor's log, which can now be accessed on the Trust website. Next slide. A key date for your diaries is Saturday, September the 7th, when the Trust will be holding its annual Open Day, which showcases many of the outstanding services provided by Trust staff via stalls, presentations and departmental tours. During the past year, we governors have focused on the presentation of Trust strategy at member events, but more recently, in February, we held a very popular event based on the newly installed state-of-the-art linear accelerator in the radiotherapy unit. We'd like to build on that. The Pulse magazine has been transformed thanks to the efforts of our communications and Trust governance teams, and is now beginning to generate increased interest amongst recipients. Governors are encouraged to get involved in other relevant community groups, such as patient participation groups at their local surgeries, peer support groups, health and wellbeing boards and others, in order to help governors to represent the views of the community more effectively to the Trust board. One facility that we and others would like to see improved is a Trust website. It can be difficult to navigate and it lacks a number of features that could be useful to governors, members and the public. Redesigning the website would be of significant benefit to the Trust. Next slide. At one point during the past year, the number of governors in post dropped to just 19 out of a possible 29 for a variety of reasons, including resignations, but more disturbing, a lack of candidates applying to become governors. We are, however, pleased to be able to announce the election of 2 new staff governors, Natalie Allen and Ife Egbunwi, and the appointment of a new partner governor, Victor Corrimer, the general manager of ACRE, the Alliance for Cohesion and Racial Equality. We have also been notified of the appointment of replacement governors for West Berkshire and Reading Borough Councils, Graham Bridgman and Ruth McEwen. I'm also able to announce the results of the recent elections. The following were elected as public governors: Bet Tigner for Reading, congratulations Bet, and Fiona Anderson for Wokingham, while John Bagshaw was returned unopposed for a second term in West Berkshire. Pam Lynch was elected as the new governor representing Trust volunteers. Welcome to you all. Next slide, please. During the year, we were all greatly saddened by the death of one of our founder governors, Ian Clay, while still in post and representing volunteers at the Trust. I would also add that another of our founder governors, Deborah Sander, who retired as the Reading Public Governor in 2017, also passed away recently. Both were also patients at the Trust. Colin Lee, formerly Chair of Trustees at Thames Valley Air Ambulance, resigned during the year, as did Shirley Anstis of Acre, Gordon Lundy of West Berkshire Council and Graham Hoskin of Reading Borough Council. Two of our public governors, Spike Humphrey and Malcolm Edwards, have decided not to stand for re-election following the end of their first period of office. And one of our most committed governors, Sunila Lobo, was unsuccessful in applying for a second term in a contested election in Reading. We would like to record our heartfelt thanks to all of them for their many and various contributions to the Council, the Trust and the community during their periods of office. Next slide. Disappointingly, we still have unfilled vacancies for governors in East and West Berkshire, as well as 2 staff vacancies. Hopefully these can be filled in the next round of elections in October. More recently, again as required under statute, the membership committee has reviewed the representation of public governors in relation to changes in population, hospital attendances, etc., and concluded that the number of public governors representing Wokingham Borough should be increased by 1 at the expense of the East Berkshire constituency. Looking ahead to next year, governors will be looking at improving their assurance that the non-executive directors are holding the board to account. Following the very successful radiotherapy event in February, we'll be looking at new topics and formats for governor events. We know we need to increase membership from the current level of about 3,300 public members and to improve our engagement with the current membership. We're very conscious that our current Trust membership is heavily weighted towards older age groups. And like many other organisations, we would like to do what we can to improve participation of younger age groups. However, recent experience of a very poor student response to a proposed event at the local college was somewhat discouraging. Perhaps rather tongue-in-cheek, and bearing in mind the very considerable volume of Twitter traffic emanating from certain Trust executives, governors may need to look, rather belatedly, at developing a social media strategy. Thank you for your attention.
Fabulous. Steve, Nikki, Tony, thank you. I hope that gave you a flavour of the story. I have to say, that was the most efficient and focused set of presentations I've seen at an AGM, but the story is magnificent, magnificent. We do have challenges, and we'll continue to focus on those. So what I'd like to do now, I promised you at least half an hour, so we've got 10 to 7, so half an hour of questions. I have some questions that have come in. Can I suggest, in terms of the room itself, I'll open it up first, some questions in the room, I think. Let's stay live while we're here. If you can just ask your question, and if everyone else would allow the person asking the question to get through it, I promise you, all the board members are sitting here on tenterhooks, waiting to respond. And so I'll try my best to direct it to the right person. I'll probably get it wrong, but let me open it up to the floor. So 30 minutes, we're going to have any questions, any topic regarding what you've heard today or any other points.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think I just kind of reiterate that we know that the challenges that kind of people have visiting the site is significant. So between now and certainly the end of the financial year, there's kind of commitment for us to make improvements around that. We have got an external organisation in to actually kind of help us do some kind of data collection about the traffic coming through, the footfall coming through, so as we actually have got kind of accurate data. Certainly in the next kind of month to 6 weeks, the car park barriers are being replaced, and we're starting to actually put some better technology into that space to make the flow through kind of more efficient. We are going to absolutely have to look over this period about who is able to come onto site. So that's a conversation with our staff as well. So as we're valuing certainly the movement of our kind of clinical staff and other essential staff onto site, but we're going to have some tough conversations back into the organisation about how we kind of manage that, because we know that we're oversubscribed. So as we can create more opportunities for our patients and our visitors to be able to kind of come onto site more effectively. But actually we also know that we are going to have to, as a important member of this community in Reading, recognise that the wider kind of Reading transport strategy and approach around kind of low carbon footprint means that we're going to have to play our part as part of the community, both in terms of patients, visitors and staff around transport on and off site. So making opportunities certainly for our staff to look at alternatives. So we're working actively with the local authority in terms of opportunities for more off-site parking to support our staff. Ways that we can look at subsidising through Reading buses, transport again on and off site for our staff and for our patients and visitors, making sure that that's easier for them to be able to access. Working actively with Reading buses about how we extend certain routes and times of routes, so as again that offer to patients, visitors and staff can kind of be extended. And then looking to optimise kind of the space that we absolutely have on site and around us as well. One of the things which I know, is it Duncan? Where's Duncan? Yeah, Duncan, who very helpfully came to one of our governors' meetings and rightly raised a challenge in terms of the cost of parking on this site. And we have done work to really look at how we benchmark. One of the statistics is that it's actually cheaper if you want to go and do some shopping in town during the day to come and park on this site than it is.
I told you not to say that.
Inside. So we have got some disincentives around actually kind of people coming onto this site. But the challenge Duncan made was that we haven't looked intelligently necessarily at the moment about our parking kind of charges. And his challenge to me was he came onto site with his young child to come to A&E. And ended up with a significant kind of parking charge, having already got here at 7 o'clock in the evening and had to leave at midnight. So we need to kind of look at the times of day and our charging for people coming onto site, but we also need to think kind of responsibly about when the car park is kind of got low volume, low use, and how we kind of change the car parking charges so as we reflect that when people are actually coming on out of hours as well. So as people don't get landed with those kind of high parking charges, particularly when the car park's empty. And we've committed, so my commitment to Duncan was to look at it immediately. We looked at it immediately, and we are absolutely going to make a change around those kind of parking structures in terms of charges, and we're likely to do that when we look at the overall kind of approach to parking on this site within the next kind of 6 months. So we recognise it's an issue. We have to actually make some improvements between now and certainly the end of the financial year, the end of March, and the commitment is to do that in a number of different ways that includes kind of parking charges and access to parking on site, but there's also needs to be civically responsible about our kind of green commitments and our low carbon footprint in terms of other ways of incentivising not just our staff but patients and visitors to look at using alternatives, and we have to do that in partnership with other organisations like the local authority.
Thank you, Chair.
It's beyond than just transport.
I think we're all becoming increasingly aware of our carbon responsibilities, and I think the Trust is a major influencer in this regard. So as you'd expect within our estates policy, underpinning all of the things we're doing around our buildings and our equipment, our power load, and the materials and chemicals we use around site, we're absolutely, and our estates strategy is really clear on this, targeting a reduction in resource use generally. You know, we're looking at reducing waste, waiting, unwarranted variation in every service we provide and all that we're using. The design principles, colleagues may be aware, we've commissioned a major master planning of all of our site here. The key underlying principle of how we're going to occupy the site going forward is to minimise the use of resources, and we're looking at life cycle costs. So where is it most effective to use disposable versus cleanable or washable supplies, and the green travel and transport plan, not only for our patients and our staff, but also the logistics. You saw the numbers on my presentation earlier around the number of trucks and the number of things we have delivered here. We're working with NHS supply chain to make sure we, again, use that in the most efficient way and to minimise pollution. And we're also, I guess, in terms of the wider carbon footprint, through our workforce strategies, we're looking at how do we encourage staff and others to be healthier at work. So how do we encourage and incentivise through the cycle schemes? We've got schemes where staff can access low-cost cycling supplies, and we're also looking at encouraging car sharing. And I know Steve mentioned the other work we're doing with the policy. So our carbon footprint for a business that's spending nearly £450 million is going to be big, and there is nothing we're not looking at to make sure we can be responsible environmentally as we deliver safe services to patients. Okay, we have absolutely no plans to dispose of land or buildings on this site at the moment, so I can assure folks that's not in our plans.
Good, okay, thank you. Mary, is that one you'd like to pick up? This is Mary Sherry, who's our Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Chief Executive.
Hi, good question and really pertinent. So yes, we have very good and clear evidence that our emergency activity is increasing, and what tends to happen, it can go in steps. So we faced this 3 or 4 years ago and we're seeing another step change. So we work as part of an integrated care system. We chair what's called the A&E Delivery Board that coordinates that partnership working. And we're currently doing what we would call a deep dive, so a good analysis of the activity. So we have lots of information. We know where our referrals come from. We can interrogate the clinical conditions and the acuity and all of that. So yes, that pressure is definitely increasing. Yes, we also have an A&E department that was planned many years ago, and actually really we know that we need a capital plan also to expand that department to improve that patient experience. From a poor performance point of view, looking after those new patients that come to our front door, we do quite well, and we do quite well compared to some of our local hospitals, but we're always seeking to improve that. So yes, the activity is going up, yes, the acuity and therefore the admissions, particularly those patients that are brought by ambulance, we have got clear evidence that that is going up. So this is a very clear focus of effort every day, because that is our most needing patient group. So we're continually looking at that, but we do it on a partnership basis, and we do that with clinicians, with non-clinical staff, and it's a big focus within the Trust every day, every week and every month.
So I think for any conditions, we would always aim to look at sort of lifestyle things that could be tried first. And blood pressure is a really good example, isn't it? So things that you can do around exercise, around, not in your case, but in some patients, reducing weight, looking at diet and things like that, absolutely. We would always look, though, at medications if we need them that are evidence-based, and sometimes the evidence for more natural-based therapies can be limited, often because the trials haven't been done. So I think, yes, we look at lifestyle things that we could intervene with, but I think we have to stick with what's evidence-based if we're prescribing it.
Thank you. That's a really good question. Our calls can be for a whole range of things, from we need a bit of paint on a bit of wall, to there's a leak in the roof, to we need some kit moving from A to B. So there are a whole range of things that will come through the call desk. It is absolutely a fact that the older the estate and the less well maintained it is, the more calls we will get. It's the same within our own homes. You know, the better we can keep our estate, the less reactive maintenance we'll do, and the more planned maintenance we can do. And certainly the capital programme that we've got, both at the moment and for the coming years, has that in mind. So how do we make sure that everything is working as well as it can be straight away, and that things aren't needing repairs on an ad hoc basis? But we do experience a relatively high number of calls because we're a large organisation and we've got lots of areas that we need to look at. You saw the slide on how many football pitches we're cleaning every day. Well, we're cleaning everywhere we're using. So one of our challenges is can we consolidate our services and use less space? So we're looking at technology, how we can do virtual outpatient appointments, and how we can use some of our newer parts of our estate. We're looking at facilities in other locations that we own that are better quality than some of the estate's facilities we have on site here. But absolutely, we're very committed to reducing that number of calls by making sure that the estate has been refurbished and is running properly. But there will always be a high volume of calls because we're operating lots of services in lots of places.
That was a smart question, Richard, thank you. I mean, I have to say, over the 3.5 years I've been here, the transformation in the responsiveness and the quality of the fixing has changed dramatically. So there's probably a bit of catch-up still in there, but we've fixed a lot of things that were glaringly obvious that needed to be fixed a few years ago. So it's a journey, a never-ending journey. I saw a hand somewhere. Yes, please. So just now it was about 37 million of capital, and now it's 1 pillow per bed.
I'd like to assure whoever asked the question that we absolutely aren't rationing pillows. So in terms of scale of the pillow supply service, we have a standing order, as you'd expect, with our suppliers for things like pillows, so we can call off whenever we need them. We have regular deliveries and we don't run short. That would be one of the calls. If folks need a pillow delivered to a ward, then that would be one of the many thousand calls that would come through the estates line. So we can bring forward any orders we want to. On average, we're supplying about 1,500 pillows a year to the wards and departments. We don't have that many beds, so hopefully that will provide some assurance that we are definitely doing more than one pillow per bed. And I would reiterate, if anyone were any doubt, if ever you needed an additional pillow, just please ask and we'll get one for you. So thank you. Thank you for the question. It's really pertinent, actually, because the majority of our costs, as you'll have observed from the earlier presentation, are around pay. So pay, most of our staff are on Agenda for Change, which is a national pay scale. So the rates for that are set every year, and inflation funding is provided to us as an organisation to cover the rises on that. An element of our staffing is also provided by temporary and agency cost. We try and minimise that, but you'll be familiar, because it's been widely reported in the press, that a number of specialties and staff groups, there are more vacancies available than there are people to work in them. So particularly some of the nursing specialties and a number of our consultant positions, we struggle, like other organisations, to fill those, but other staff groups as well. So I think we are in a marketplace where we've got nationally set pay arrangements, a shortage of skilled labour, rising demand from our customers, our patients, for services that we're providing. and we don't have enough money from the taxes that are raised to pay for exponential growth in demand. So one of our challenges as an organisation continues to be, how can we reduce our waste, waiting and warranted variation? How can we run more efficiently, keeping safety and quality at the same high standard or better, while using less resource to do it? And you've very smartly observed that there isn't the same level of funding coming in for income increases as there is for staff cost increase, and that's our pinch each year. How do we make the efficiency savings so that we can still generate a surplus? So we're looking at a number of things with our staff. Caroline Ainsley, who's here, our nursing director, is particularly looking at the roles and how our nursing workforce and our allied health professional workforce can work differently so that we can do some of the stuff that we used to do with a particular staff group, we can do it with other staff groups. The digital hospital investment we're making, which is helping us protect and release clinical time to provide clinical care, and therefore free up time to do more patient contact time with the same hours we have available. All of these things together are going to help us continue to grow and innovate, as the history film showed us, because it's never going to be straightforward or easy, but we're all really committed to close that gap. And certainly our savings programme each year, so this year we're looking at an efficiency programme of 16.9 million as an organisation, which sounds an awful lot of money, and it is. We're already well on the way to finding all of those savings, but it is challenging. It absolutely is. The funding doesn't match the cost increases, hence we have to make efficiencies every year.
Very good, thanks. I'd add to that. I have a bit of a commercial background. I think one of the areas of opportunity for the NHS generally, and here I include us in that, is on the commercial side, the non-clinical side, whether it be about procurement, whether it's about real estate management. I think there's opportunities across the board which will help as well. Who wants to ask that? Steve, do you want to have a bash at that? Or?
Yeah. Go on. Maybe you can follow it up with a double act. Maybe on the coordination, because that's an important point. Yeah, kind of great question. I think we bring 500,000 people onto the site a year in terms of what was traditional outpatient attendances, and the commitment over the next kind of 3 to 5 years is to halve that, for lots of positive reasons, some of which we've already touched on in terms of carbon footprint and movement, but actually to really look at ways we can provide that point of contact around care more locally. And there's a number of ways we can do that by building up and developing the facilities and services that we run in some of our community locations, as well as using the technology kind of that's available. And I think the important thing to state is that this is not kind of coming down the road, this is already happening. We have got many specialties that are already kind of engaged in things like virtual clinics. So in our virtual fracture clinic in orthopaedics, to save people actually coming up to the hospital, we can run that through a telephone conversation that's triaged and overseen by one of our orthopaedic consultants. We have got those kind of telemedicine opportunities in places like rheumatology and cardiology. And increasingly we're starting to open up more specialties to things like Skype clinics, and the opportunity to do that through kind of other forms of media. So that's really important. It's really important that we still provide a blended opportunity, because people, will still need and want that direct contact, and clinically that's still important. But actually what we're looking to do is use our locations and our technology to offer the range, opening up the range of opportunities that there are for that kind of interaction. Being digitally enabled is really important, so the clinical record can be available in a range of locations and can be available kind of at the fingertip of the clinicians and kind of the patient kind of as well. So we've already seen over this last period I think it's about a 7% kind of reduction in the outpatient activity, outpatient attendances. I think that's right, Andy, isn't it? About 7% that we're kind of having here, and we've got that kind of a trajectory over the next kind of period to see a significant reduction as we increase the offer that we provide both in terms of location and also kind of technology. I think it'd be worth, when we're talking about the wrapping services around, maybe Janet will just talk about that, because in our locations, particularly in the community, like Bracknell, like Townlands, like West Berkshire Community Hospital and other locations, bringing specialties together around the care of an individual patient who may have a number of different conditions is a really important commitment that we need to provide to our community and to those individual patients. Maybe we've got some real examples of how that's happening.
It wasn't a ripple.
Follow that.
Someone just got something. I think it was a fly.
So what we've done is we've got a suite of options sort of based on best practice and ideas that people have come up with both in the trust and nationally, and we're going to specialties and saying, look, these are the various options that you could use for doing things differently, and some of them may be that the patients just don't need to come at all, so by providing advice back to the GP or by looking at the referral in a different way, the patients just won't even need to join the car park queue at all. Then there will be other things like some of the virtual clinics that Steve's mentioned, possibilities for Skype clinics too. We are looking at whether we can coordinate. So some diseases absolutely go hand in hand. So the odds are if you're diabetic, you may have heart disease, you may have renal disease. So we've got clinics where you can come in and see both of those specialties at the same time, which will help with some of the problems that you're talking about. It would be great if we could get to the situation where perhaps you were at home and the specialists were in the room here together, and I think technology is going to start enabling that. The other thing is obviously that we do provide an awful lot of community services. So we've worked very closely with Berkshire Healthcare. I don't know if it's relevant, but we do provide a community geriatric service with them. So we've got a raft of geriatricians out in each locality who can come out to patients in their own home if they're not able to come in at all. And they would provide holistic care and coordinate the other specialists to give their opinion. So there are lots of alternatives to coming and spending your time in the car park. I cover dermatology then. So we've had a really tough year with dermatology, as probably quite a lot of you know. There's a national shortage of consultant dermatologists, and we've been struck by that as well. Something like 50% of newly advertised posts go unfilled. And we've ended up in a position where our number of substantive consultants has dropped considerably. And we took the very difficult decision at the end of last year to actually limit appointments just to those patients who were coming through on the 2-week wait, so that's the suspected cancer pathway. And we did that on grounds of patient safety, because we just didn't feel we had the substantive workforce to be able to maintain other patients coming through. And we know that's really difficult for patients that are having to go elsewhere, over to Bracknell or out to other services. I'm really pleased to say that we've been doing a huge piece of work over the year on dermatology, and things are starting to pay off. So there's lots of things, but I guess 3 in particular. Working in partnership with Oxford, we've managed to recruit some joint posts with Oxford hospitals, so consultants that will be working sessions up in Oxford and also here. And we don't have start dates confirmed, but we think that will be into the autumn and maybe the early part of next year. These are trainees that are just finishing their training, so we've kind of snapped them up early before they've even finished their training. The other thing that we're doing is some of the things we've been talking about. So teledermatology, we're improving access to that. So you can have a photograph snapped of your dermatological problem in your GP surgery, and that can be beamed across to one of our specialists. So you don't have to come up here, and we can use our workforce much more efficiently. And we know that that's really beneficial. And then probably the third thing is working really closely with GPs. As the GPs start to cluster into neighbourhood clusters, we're looking at can we provide some services actually out in the GP surgeries. And we've got a number of GPs really interested in doing that. So working in partnership with the consultants to be able to provide you with dermatological services a lot closer to home. So I'm sorry for the patient that's got to wait till November. Some of this is not going to come in place quick enough, but I'm really hopeful that as we move into next year, things are going to improve on that front.
So the specific question that was asked about ophthalmology is about cataracts. So this is actually a great question because it's a really good example of how we continue to look at demand how we service capacity for that demand, and also how we transform and innovate. So cataracts specifically, the history is over a number of years until very recently, our permission, if you like, to treat cataracts was restricted on very strong criteria. That's recently been relaxed and broadened, so actually the demand has very recently gone up. So ophthalmology, and particularly cataracts, is always high volume anyway, but now the volume's gone up further, and the data very clearly shows quite a step in referrals. So as we're doing that, we're now looking at, okay, so how can we now work more efficiently? So can we improve the efficiency of our lists? Can we do more cases per list? Can we improve our pre-op and do more one-stop? Because one of the other aspects of the question was the waiting time, firstly for your outpatient appointment, then your pre-op assessment, and then your operation. So high volume specialty, referrals have gone up further. Transformation, service improvement, looking at efficiency and how we deliver the service. We do deliver the 92% standard for what's called the referral to treatment standard for ophthalmology overall, but cataracts is now lagging behind. But we're absolutely on it, we're tackling it, and we're really committed, including as part of our demand and capacity modelling, looking at our job plans and how many staff we need to improve that waiting time. If I then wrap that up as a general point, so I think both aspects of those questions reflect, along with the emergency question, how we're continually looking at our access in terms of access to services and waiting times, and how we're continually looking at that demand and capacity. Digital Hospital will help that to an extent, so it helps our admin teams who are crucial. So we need to remember that there's nothing that a patient receives treatment for that does not require an admin task to be carried out for you to be booked in and for things to progress. So the role of admin is really, really important. So as that becomes more and more digital, then we can improve those efficiencies. And because the data is now more available, we can also use that data to plan and improve how we treat patients. So it's a really good reflection of our commitment to continuously try to improve what we do, linked to the access agenda.
So I think the biggest three risks will be levels of demand, our estate, and our workforce. So I'm happily seeing some nods from my director colleagues, because what we deliver is all about our people and the quality of service that we're able to provide. And we know that Caroline, our chief nurse, has done a huge amount of work with other colleagues in terms of how we've got stability in our nursing workforce, but we know the quality of care that people receive, the experience they receive, is often directly kind of related to kind of how they feel that there's sufficient kind of staff and expertise, and that goes across everywhere. Like as Mary said, also in our administrative teams and kind of our non-clinical staff as well. So getting further movement in terms of the stability of our people over this next period and making this organisation the best place to work so we can attract and retain people and give them opportunities to grow and develop kind of here is really important. And I do think we've got a good story to tell about that, and we've got a good programme looking ahead. I mean, our estate is a challenge, and hence not part of what we've talked about around kind of the outpatient programme, use of technology, is if we can move 500,000 people movements off of this site, that starts to kind of really give us other opportunities about what we can do and develop on this site. Certainly for this next period, Nikki said we're putting £37 million worth of capital and funding into aspects of our digital programme, our equipment replacement, but also the things that you won't see on this site, the drains, the roofs, the utilities that come into those spaces that staff and patients kind of occupy. And over this kind of next 6 to 9 months, our site master planning for here will give us some real clarity about how we develop over the next kind of 5 years and beyond this site to make sure it really is fit for purpose, whilst also valuing and kind of recognising the fact that we are custodians of the kind of amazing kind of facade that we have kind of out front, and so we take that kind of very responsibly. And then kind of third area around demand, I mean, I think it's well versed kind of nationally about, you know, the demand that we're seeing. It's coming through in a number of different routes, whether it's kind of ageing population or actually some of our population who are developing longer term conditions in their middle years as well, that we're seeing kind of coming through. And, you know, I think one of our tasks is to work as an integrated kind of system with our GPs, with our local authority partners, with our community leaders and our community groups, and our kind of community mental health kind of partners, to really look at how we can continue to adapt the offer for the population of kind of Berkshire West and beyond that we serve. And I think that's a challenge not just in Berkshire West, that's a kind of a challenge kind of nationally kind of that we face. And we've touched on some of the things that we're doing kind of around that in terms of trying to innovate to help us with that. But that would be probably the third worry that kind of we're constantly focused on. Is that right? Yeah.
Thank you, Steve.
That's okay.
All right, so I'm going to wrap this up now. I think it's spot on time. So I think you've seen today the passion that comes out of the presenters, but I assure you the power of this trust, your trust, is that the leadership, all of them are in the room, do a wonderful job of making sure we have the right governance, and through Steve, the right operational performance, and I think through the board as a whole, that we have a solid strategy that will give us that sustainable next 180 years. So excited, passionate, and very proud of everything that the teams do here, and I hope you sense a little bit of that and feel the same. With that, I'm going to pull this to a close. Remember, we have our open day. It's a bit softer and fluffier than this. It's a tour of bits of the hospital and a chance to meet and chat with people. That's on the 7th of September. It's a Saturday, but well worth the investment. So hopefully we'll see you and a million others then. In the interim, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to the teams that put it together, and thank you to the presenters. Have a safe trip.